Hello and welcome. This is Casey. In today's video, we will be continuing an Iridology reading that I've already posted the introduction, or part one, if you will. And in that video, we discussed the iris color, the constitution, some of the features that were common in both eyes. We spoke to the anemia ring and anemia and several other topics. So if you haven't seen that, I will place the link in the description box. All right, so jumping right in, we're going to take a deeper dive into the features that we're seeing in this iris and how they may be reflective of the health and well-being of this person. And I like to start in the center of the iris at the pupil, and we can see when we look at this pupil, while it is almost perfectly round, it's actually not quite perfectly round. And it is perfect, it's just not perfectly round in some areas. So we have this area here specifically where we see some flattening. And pupil flattening is generally an indication that there's been some sort of stress or tension in the central nervous system, and it is very much related to the anatomical and or physiological features and functions outside of the area. So we'll look at what this radii solaris is, what area, and this one, and then I would say as well, this little area in here, this little tiny radii solaris, could be related to that pupil flattening. And so let's go ahead and see. We'll follow the pupil. So this is the first one and probably the most significant area where we're seeing the flattening. But if we follow the pupil around, it's circle, circle, circle a little bit. And I initially thought that this was a flattening in here until I got to this little, I don't know, corner. It sort of takes a little corner. And I would say that this, so there could be some in here. But certainly I would see this as an area of pupil flattening. And this is going to take, you know, sitting way back in your chair, and getting more of a bird's eye view to see different angles of the pupil. And for me, I don't know about you guys, I will often see things from one perspective, and that could be the day or the angle or the space, and then, you know, maybe the next day or a different angle, and I'll see, you know, variations. So it's always good to have a few different perspectives and take time when you're doing an iridology reading or when you're looking at your own eyes. All right, so let's start with this area here, and we're going to just look at the radii solaris that we're seeing in this area. And because, so not only is the pupil a little bit flat right here, we also have a radii solaris here that is significant, that is originating from the pupillary margin, and you can see that. And this area is the forehead and temple zone, and this is significant for this person as she does experience migraines. And the migraines tend to start, if you've ever had a migraine or, you know, an extremely intense tension headache, you know, a lot of times they can sort of originate in the occipital region or the back of the head and are often related to the medulla. and then they sort of wrap around, and then you will feel pain in the forehead and the head area, of course, and temples. So I'm not surprised to see this radii solaris here. And she's had chronic migraines since the age of 13, but in more recent years has found some relief with emotional release work and chiropractic work. I'm not sure exactly, but she has been working on this, and she's had these migraines lessen in intensity and frequency, from what I gather. All right, so that's the forehead and temple area, but what I'm seeing is that these lifelong migraines and pain have taken their toll, and we're seeing that in the pupil and the nervous system. All right, and then below that we have another radii solaris here, and that is actually the nose, but very, very, very close to the zone. It's sort of merging into the upper jaw and then the lower jaw below that. And she's also experienced teeth grinding, or TMJ. And so I'm not surprised to see that correlation as well. While I'm here, I'm seeing this area that seems to be a bit more white. And that is actually the eye zone. And so we know that the eyes quite often are involved in migraines. A lot of people who get headaches and migraines find that they are triggered by sunlight. So natural light, like usually probably a good amount of it, depending on where you're at. As well as artificial light and EMF. So the computer and any kind of electrical devices can also trigger migraines. So I'm seeing, in terms of when you are looking into them, I'm seeing that here in the eye zone. And the eyes actually, from the perspective of Ayurveda, just because we've already sort of introduced this concept, I will bring this in. The eyes are the primary area for the Pitta dosha. They have everything to do with Pitta, which is fire. And fire is the element that leads into or lends itself to inflammation. And I am seeing some inflammation. I'm guessing, I'm not going to do like an Ayurvedic analysis for this person, but I would guess she's probably a Vata Pitta, perhaps, just because I'm seeing a lot of air. And then with the inflammation and just some other factors, I'm guessing she also has some fire in her constitution. And so on that topic of inflammation, we're going to see inflammation or fire. How do you see the element of fire in the eyes? You know what? I probably need to do a video speaking on Ayurveda and how you see the elements in the eyes, and perhaps this is leading into that. But fire in the eyes, you could see that. You can see elements of fire and earth as well in the brown eye, in all variations of the brown eye. So I'm not just speaking to the true brown eye, I'm speaking to the mixed colors, the hazel, the light brown, all those variations on brown. So that's one way the fire can come through. Another way is if there's an excess of fire in the body, it's going to be indicating inflammation. And how you would see that in a blue eye would be through the white. So wherever you see white in the blue iris, you're seeing inflammation, generally speaking, and that quite often is related to an excess of fire. All right. So to summarize this little portion of the area of the iris where the pupil is exhibiting flattening, we have the forehead and temple, we have the eye, we have the nose, we have the upper jaw, we have the lower jaw, and all of this being related. She's also experiencing chronic tension or pain in the shoulders and neck area, which we'll see. But all of this related to the whole entire area of the shoulders, neck, up into the head and brain area. And so that leads me into this area here, which is the head and brain area. And there is, I would say, it's almost consistent, the amount of congestion and white and yellow that we're seeing throughout the iris. It's sort of in this area outside of the bowel wall and very close to the bowel wall. But I would say there's just slightly more up in the head and brain area. And so we're looking at possible brain fog. That's just what this looks like. And in my experience, that's often the case. And she does have, from her intake, we are looking at cognition and memory, specifically short-term memory. It's not a huge deal, but it is a little bit of a concern. So I would say that that would make sense related to the congestion in the head and brain area and the inflammation. And then why don't we go ahead and get into the radii solaris that are emanating from the stomach. So these would be major radii solaris. And we are going to be speaking to a couple of brain zones. And so I want to start at 12 o'clock and go round the clock with the radii solaris. But actually first, before we leave this area of the stomach, I want to note, and I'm pretty sure I did already speak to this in the introductory video, there is a hypoactive condition of the stomach as seen in the gray. So if you were seeing white in this area, you would have the indication of inflammation and perhaps hyperactive stomach activity, perhaps excessive acidic condition in the stomach, but in this case, after it goes from white and the condition continues, it will often go into the darker color. So we're seeing the gray here in the stomach area, and a lack of hydrochloric acid. And I've already spoken to that, so I'm not going to go into that. In terms of the bowel wall, you don't always see the bowel wall in every iris, and it's not a positive or a negative thing. I'm not even really gonna, maybe I will just a little trace it out. What I'm seeing, if I don't see a bowel wall defined clearly, often it's in the shading, and I will go with that. So there seems to be a little bit of delineation in this area. I'm guessing up in here because it's pretty foggy, and then something like that. So this area inside of the yellow zone which yellow is the color of the solar plexus, and this is the stomach, and which resides in the stomach area. So that is delineating the whole entire stomach and bowel area in here. All right, and now let's get into the brain zones starting at 12 o'clock. And this one here is, I would say, one of the more significant markings in this iris, and you would see it almost straight up as a 12 o'clock marking, but it is just slightly, just barely, like maybe 11:55. So it's leaning into the sensory motor brain zone. So we have the animation life, or the vitality brain zone, which is straight up 12 o'clock. And then to the left of that, in the right eye, we have the sensory motor brain zone. And I'm going to give you a couple of highlights on the sensory motor or sensory locomotion brain zone. And I do have a summary of all the brain zones on my website, and I'm also pursuing a project of doing videos, short videos, but it hasn't really worked out that way on all of the brain zones. So I've just gotten through the medulla, and that was quite extensive and lengthy. So, but you can check out my website for a description of the brain zones, and then stay tuned as I get through the rest of the brain zones in video format. But sensory motor is, let's see, and this is from Farida Sharon's book on Iridology, and she says the sensory motor zone coordinates how our senses guide us to stand and move in this world. It works closely with the five senses brain zone, which we will see, as it integrates mental and physical functions and controls movement. This brain zone influences the sensations that guide us to know where we are: heat, cold, pain, touch, pressure, movement, and tension. It also affects the more subtle functions of perception and reactions to sound or light, keyword, as well as muscle coordination, strength, and fatigue levels. When abnormal, the person suffers from lack of coordination and inhibited movements accompanied by fear, uncertainty, and lack of confidence. All right, so is it abnormal? No. Is a radii solaris going through a brain zone of significance? Yes, for sure. So when I see radii solaris going through brain zones, I look at all of the aspects, the positive and the negative. And so that's sensory motor, and like I said, it actually is going into the vitality brain zone or animation life, and that brain zone is related to energy, vitality, how much energy or zest for life we have in order to complete our projects, our dreams. And if it is hypoactive or it is dark in that area, often it indicates a lack thereof in terms of vitality, joy, energy, mental energy, liveliness, optimism, and so forth. For me, it is very much connected to the crown center, and that chakra is related to our direct connection to source and how we receive energy and insight from our higher mind, our higher self, however you want to see that. And so she has mentioned some level of fatigue, and that may be related here as we're seeing the vitality brain zone. All right, and then next up, I want to, let's see, move over to this brain zone here, and this is the five senses. So as just mentioned in the description for sensory motor, it is related somewhat to sensory motor, and it is, I'm not going to go fully into this brain zone, it is just as it sounds. It is about our senses and how we experience sensation. So how we feel all of our senses, and there may be some that are more highlighted than others. So we can have a heightened experience of our physical and even spiritual senses and emotional senses. And we can also have a dullness in the way that we experience our senses. And it's interesting that this brain zone traverses the pituitary gland, which is also seen here in this little pointer from this flattening, as I mentioned. So while I'm not seeing definitive signs or markings in the pituitary gland, it's pretty foggy. I do feel called to see the pituitary gland as of significance for this person, and I am going to include some herbs in her profile that will strengthen the pituitary gland. All right, and so let's keep moving around the clock. We're going to go clockwise, and this area here, this dark area in here is the thyroid. The thyroid, as I'm making this little circle with my pen, I'm realizing that the skin ring actually does sort of encroach upon this territory, and the thyroid is related to the skin, and the thyroid is related very much so to the Vata dosha. So everything, and as I mentioned in the last video, I don't know what they understood physically about glands 5,000 years ago, but they knew. They definitely knew. So when they spoke to the Vata dosha, they were really speaking to so many of the characteristics of the thyroid and the parathyroid gland. And so here we have the thyroid, and we also see the parathyroid here closer into the bowel wall, and it extends down a little bit more towards the 3 o'clock. But I'm certainly seeing the thyroid, and she did mention that, you know, I'm not sure what kind of diagnostic tools she was using, if it's blood work, but there was an issue with the thyroid, and it's not so much anymore. But we're seeing the skin ring, we're seeing the thyroid, and this is of the air element, and as well as the parathyroid. This is related to calcium utilization. I already spoke to this, so I'm not going to go into it. I just wanted to show you the thyroid here. And then below that, we have the esophagus, still somewhat in the throat area. The esophagus is somewhat connected, at least its function, to the medulla, which we're going to see. And so that's that: esophagus, thyroid, parathyroid, scapula right here. And then I want to show you one of the more exciting features or areas of this iris, and this was where we saw in the introduction a pointer in the sclera. And so this area is the back area, and we have a radii solaris emanating here, and it is like a little bit you know, not so straight, and that goes right along with the Vata uneven qualities. And it is leading right into this whole back area. This is one of the first things that I saw, that I noticed when I looked at these eyes, was the sort of wavy and somewhat more, there's more distance between these iris fibers in this area. This whole area is the back. And when we did our consult and we were looking at her eyes initially, I mentioned this, and she said that she had some level of scoliosis. So I'm not sure. I don't think it's severe or anything, but oh my goodness. I was like, what? So we have this uneven fibers, and they are showing us that there is an unevenness in the spine. Really interesting. And then not only that, this area in here, as we travel down past the spine, is the bladder. And so the bladder is like right there. I mean, could even be that this radii solaris is going straight through the bladder, but this whole area is bladder. So it goes from back to bladder. And there is a prolapse in the bladder. So again, crazy, because prolapse is connected to the parathyroid and the thyroid, the calcium utilization, the weakness of connective tissue and structure. Due to inflammation, the body is pulling calcium out of areas that, you know, have calcium. And so we see this weakening and this sort of collapse of structure when we have a weak thyroid and parathyroid. And so I will have some herbal recommendations. You can also, depending on, you know, where you're at with taking glandulars, you may consider taking a thyroid or parathyroid glandular. But I mean, it's more so about the diet and herbs. So that's that. And let's now look at so we have the kidney area. At 6 o'clock, we're going to have the thigh, knee, foot. So that is somewhat coming up. I don't know. I have notes here. There was something. I don't know if it was the right side of the body or the left about the knee. But I'm not so concerned with the thigh, knee, foot. I'm more so concerned with the kidney and the adrenal. And I'm seeing this area here. You can just kind of look straight over here onto the chart. This whole area outside of the bladder would be considered the kidney and adrenal gland. And we have these little radii solaris here, so that's inside the bowel wall. And then we have another one here. Again, a little bit of waviness in this area. Not a huge big deal, but I am seeing the right kidney and adrenal gland come up, in which case I'll always look up and see if there's anything in the mental or anxiety zone. And there's not a radii solaris there, but it is a little inflammation is there. And she doesn't have like chronic, you know, debilitating anxiety, nothing like that. Just a slight nervousness from time to time, from what I gather. But it does run in the family. And she did experience as a child some of the classic signs of adrenal gland weakness or emphasis, I will say. And one of those is shyness, and even sort of excessive shyness. That it can range, but any kind of shyness that seems a little bit more than average would be the adrenal glands, as well as fears that come out of nowhere. And as a child, like being afraid of certain things that aren't likely to happen. And that is fairly common, but it is very much connected to the adrenal glands, at least in a physiological sense. All right, so we have tiny foot here, slight weakness in the groin area or the hip area, abdominal wall here, so back to the digestive system. And then moving into I'm seeing this, the pancreas is over here, and then this area where you see this more reddish area, or orangish, a deeper shade of all of this is the gallbladder, and then the liver here. So there is a little bit of emphasis on the liver and gallbladder. We're seeing the arm moving into the lungs, very close to the breast area. I did also note, I don't remember if it was in this eye or another eye, some of the female reproductive anatomy, and I sort of got this inclination to recommend red raspberry leaf for her, so I will. And red raspberry is for most often known to strengthen the female reproductive system. It's also quite mineralizing and balancing, and it's a really nice tasting leaf to include in tea form. All right, so still in the lung area, all through here, the lung area, and then up in this area, we're seeing some inflammation and a little bit of fiber weakness in the neck and shoulder. All right, and then I think one of the more significant areas and markings of this iris is this brain zone here, and this is the medulla, and it starts, you know, straight out of the gate from the pupillary margin. And so I did do an entire video on the medulla brain zone, and I highly recommend, if you have markings in the medulla, that you do watch the video I did on the medulla brain zone. But in short, the medulla is essentially the bridge between the brain and the spinal cord, or the brain stem and the spinal cord, and it synchronizes multitude functions related to our equilibrium and survival. These include breathing or respiration, circulation, heart activity, blood vessel pressure and diameter. It is related to the diaphragm and the oxidation of the blood, lungs, and tissues. So here we go back to the anemia, as well as the reflexes of swallowing, hiccuping, sneezing, and coughing. And we have several nerves, cranial nerves, that originate out of the medulla, and that includes the vagus nerve. The medulla is also very much associated with and connected to migraines, and especially the phenomena of the aura that some people experience with migraines. And I'm not sure if this one experiences the aura or not, but regardless, the medulla is connected to migraines. And there are a number of therapies, and I haven't done part 2 to the medulla brain zone video yet. It is on my list, but we're going to talk about different therapies, and I highly recommend craniosacral for this. I also recommend, if you can find a really good Reiki practitioner or massage therapist that can do holds in that area of the occipital ridge, or chiropractic, as I believe she is doing. And then there are herbs as well. So I'm going to include some of those in her profile, and then I will speak to that as well when I do that medulla brain zone part 2 video. All right, so I believe this will sum up the right eye, and after I turn the camera off, if I have any more thoughts, I will include them in the left eye video. And until then, I will see you in a minute. Okay. All right, so we have the left eye on the screen, and we are seeing similar features to the right eye, even down to the brain zones. And so let's go ahead and start again at the center. We'll look at the digestive system. Same-ish, a little bit more darkness directly surrounding the pupil. It could be the lighting or the picture. So really the stomach area is a focus. A slight amount of jagged edges. So again, back to the question of malabsorption, probably, yeah, on some level. And then just, you know, that gray that is indicating a hypoactive stomach. And then in terms of the pupil, this one seems a little bit more rounded or with less flattening. The one flattening area that I see is right there, and that is pretty dang close to that left kidney. So I would attribute it to that, and then we'll see what's in this area. I believe I saw some female reproductive. Again, that's just been kind of coming up for me with her eyes. So we have this flattening, and similar story in the stomach and bowels. One thing, and again, it could be the photo, I'm seeing this haziness. And we did speak to the anemia, which from my perspective, because there's the blue ring around the entire eye, in addition to the skin ring, the anemia is systemic, especially based on the symptoms that she's been experiencing. But when you see an extra level, a higher level, more emphasis of the anemia up in the head and brain area, that will indicate that there certainly can be challenges with memory, cognition, and so forth, because we're looking at the head and brain area. So we have fog and haze, and so much of it is related to the digestive system. As you can see, that the fogginess and the discoloration, the lymphatic congestion is a little bit thicker in the head and brain area. So I will work with her. I will give her some suggestions. In addition to what I've, sort of been saying in the videos, we will talk about some dietary recommendations and some iron-rich, there are so many iron-rich plants that are more bioavailable to the body. So I will recommend those for her. And certainly, certainly the docs, the yellow dock, and along with nettle, which is one of my favorite plants to talk about and consume and tell other people to consume. It's extremely high in minerals and in iron, and does offer a complete amino acid profile. Also, dandelion is iron rich, and then there are of course, some of the seaweeds. And it's interesting that these plants actually are also used, nettle, dandelion, especially nettle and dandelion, for the kidneys. So we see this connection here to the kidneys and anemia. And that brings me to a point actually that I wanted to come around to. In the introductory video, I talked about Ayurveda and the study of the elements. It doesn't have to be through Ayurveda. Chinese medicine also does this. A lot of the ancient healing sciences have utilized the elemental theory as a way of balancing, bringing balance back to the human being, based on the fact that we are the little microcosms of the universe. And all of the elements that exist on this planet and in the universe exist in us. So it is the balancing of these elements that brings ultimate health back to our bodies, minds, and spirits. And I did say that it's a simple approach, and it very much is, and that's what I love about it. Doesn't need to be complicated. It's very simple. When you're out of balance, you bring elements in that bring balance and harmony back, or homeostasis back into your body. So that part is simple. Now it can get more, I don't want to say complicated, but it can get very much more so refined. And so when we start looking at different food and plants, the whole botanical kingdom, we start to see that they all hold their own signature. They all hold their own constitution. And so what we see is that the properties of the plants are aligned in the best way possible. When we're looking at healing the human being, we are aligning the properties that we are in need of to align the human being with the properties that certain plants hold. And in the way that it becomes intricate and more refined is that we're going to start to find that certain elements hold certain very specific mineral compositions, medicinal value, that somehow are perfectly aligned to the organs or the organ systems of the human being. And you could say, we've found all these compounds that are healing for this, this or that, this disorder or that disorder. But when you go into the simple perspective of it, you may find that it's simply that this disorder is a Vata disorder, and this plant, or a Pitta, or whatever element that may be lacking or in overabundance, and then we'll find that that plant or food is technically holds the minerals or exactly what is needed, and less technically it's just a matter of elemental balancing. All right, so yeah, I'm not going to go into the plants and say what is the fire plant and the air plant and this, but it's there. That information is there if you look for it. And I will be giving her botanical blueprint or profile with some of these plants included. All right, so let's now get into some of the brain zones. We're going to go again around the clock, and we're going to see a lot of the same things that we saw in the right eye. And so, for example, we have this radii solaris pretty close to the vitality zone. Almost straight up, I would say it does have the vitality or animation, life, brain zone in its territory, but it's also leaning into the five senses, just like we saw in the right eye. And then we also have, so the origination of this radii solaris is at the pupillary margin, and of course we're in the area of the transverse colon. But I wanted to show you this little cross here, which is interesting to me. So this radii solaris does that, and then we have another one starting here doing that. And I actually think that's pretty interesting. I don't know if I've ever seen a crisscross like that in the radii solaris. I could have, but for some reason it's standing out to me, so I wanted to show that to you. And then moving on to the right, it seems that we have some acute inflammation in this area, and this is the sensory locomotion or sensory motor zone, which did come up in the right eye. And then also we have inherent mental, which is quite white. And as mentioned, I usually check the inherent mental when we're looking at the adrenal gland. And so we are going to see the adrenal gland and the kidney in the left eye, and then I do see some inflammation in that brain zone. And let's see, so this radii solaris here is the equilibrium and dizziness brain zone. That did not so much come up in the right eye. It is, as it sounds, very much related to balance, equilibrium, and in its lower manifested state, dizziness. And so too does the medulla, which is directly adjacent to this brain zone, govern dizziness and equilibrium. So there is a connection there. We saw the medulla brain zone in the right eye. Here I'm seeing just some fogginess, lymphatic congestion in the medulla area, and that's actually extending out into the mastoid bone or the mastoid process. That's related to TMJ, and then we have the ear, and then we have the neck here. So again, she does experience chronic tension in the neck and shoulder area. And then the shoulder would be directly below that. And then all of this is the heart and lungs. And her heart looks pretty good. It looks good. And there is, you know, some wavy fibers in the lung area. There is the skin ring does tend to increase its territory in the area of the lungs. That's actually very common. The skin, as the skin is so related to the lungs, I believe she said that when she would, you know, she's a teacher, and when she was teaching children, that some of the, you know, when she would catch something, as it were, it would be centered in the lung area. So there definitely could be some kind of hereditary weakness in the lung area. I honestly haven't seen one eye that doesn't have some level of compromise in the lung area. And then the heart, though, looks pretty good to me. This is the, I would say here would be the delineation of the bowel wall. Again, I can't see it. I'm basing this on shading. And so the heart would be here at 3 o'clock and slightly above. So we do have this faint radii solaris coming out of that area, and then one below that as well. And then we're getting here into more of the, again, the breast area, and then below that, the arm. So I'm not seeing anything of significant weakness in the heart area. This is great news. She, I mentioned that she had longevity in her lineage, and then I went back and looked at my notes, and I want to tell you what she said. So both of her parents lived into their 90s, as I've mentioned. I went back and looked, and she said that one, I can't remember which one lived to be 98 and the other lived to be 99, and that one of her grandmothers lived to be 106, and that neither of them, you know, had heart-related issues. And I don't recall exactly. I mean, you know, that's a long life, so there doesn't need to be a reason for moving on, but it wasn't necessarily related to the heart. From what I recall, I connected it more so to the kidneys and to the expanse of functions and connections that the kidneys make throughout the body. So heart and lungs. Heart looks good to me. And then we saw the breast, we saw the arm, and then a little bit of wavy fibers in the spleen area. Something here in the female reproductive, nothing significant in the ovary, that left ovary, but still a little bit of wavy fibers here. And then this radii solaris is catching my eye, and it is originating from the stomach and going through the intestines. And this whole area of the intestines is, there's some good color in here, some congestion. There's a little more emphasis for me in this area all the way through here. So it's a little bit more yellow, a little bit more orange, a little bit more concentrated here. And the sigmoid colon, and this is not unusual. I believe that Dr. Jensen has mentioned the sigmoid colon as the most toxic area in the body, not to mention within the digestive system. So the sigmoid colon is the last part of the large intestine. So it goes descending colon into the sigmoid, and then it empties into the rectum in this area. And so there definitely could be some congestion in that last part of the colon, and that would make sense, very much make sense, especially because she has noted constipation. All right, so this particular radii solaris is leading in to the pelvis area, and then we have the abdominal wall here, the groin area, and then we have the thyny foot here, and then we have the kidney and adrenal gland in this area. I would say for sure at least this whole section in here is kidney and adrenal, and I would even extend it out a little bit more, but because there was that radii solaris sort of marking off a section, that's how I did that. But I would say even just a little bit farther in, and would be the kidney and adrenal. It's a similar situation. We have a little bit of weakness in that left kidney, and then in the adrenal gland as well, we have some congestion and discoloration. Now, as I spoke to in the first video, this can be lymphatic congestion for sure. The yellow or orange color generally is related to sulfur, and also can be related to the kidney. So it just depends. I mean, and is it hereditary? I've gotten that question before. It's a really good question. You know, people born with green eyes. Well, my mom had green eyes. So did she give you the kidney imbalance, or did she give you the accumulation of sulfur? Could be either or. Could be either or, because if you're given weaker kidneys, then that pigmentation is going to show up eventually. And if she has had sulfur accumulation to the point where it has manifested in her tissues and made an impression in her tissues, certainly that can be passed on. And we know that the newborn baby, you know, the eyes are always changing, but especially from birth and then into the early years. So I would say if you see this color and there is a kidney weakness, I would relate it to the kidneys. Usually also sulfur is more concentrated in the digestive system. And so when you see it around the pupil and in the digestive system, this is like sort of on the border though. And I have also seen a major accumulation of sulfur in eyes of a gentleman who, again, green eyes. Well, my mom had green eyes. Well, he grew up in the area of California where they are spraying sulfur and everything else like crazy. So, you know, down in the strawberries and the blueberries and sort of the Bay Area. And so you can accumulate sulfur from that, but So you can get it in the air, you can get it from your diet, you can get it if you've been eating sulfured fruits. This one, this other gentleman in particular, he actually knew that he had an allergy, or he couldn't tolerate whatsoever any sulfur. So that tells you that he has sulfur accumulated in his body in a toxic level. So if you've been in that situation, if you feel like you've been exposed to sulfur, or if your parents have, then that, or if you've taken a number of prescription drugs, that's another source of sulfur, then it could be sulfur. And if not, and again, it just sort of depends on the location. If not, if you have no relationship or connection to this concept of having sulfur in your body, then, and you have a weakness in the kidneys, which this one does, then it could very well be the enzymatic process of the kidneys producing that yellow color. But so this area here is the female reproductive. So certainly the kidney is here, and it could be extending even a little bit further. And then we have female reproductive, and then we have the bladder here. So same thing with the right eye. There's pretty significant markings in the bladder area, and which is right next to the back. So I want to show you this transversal. I feel like they are two separate ones. One may be more so related to the back, and one may be more so related to the bladder. And like I've mentioned, the bladder, she is experiencing a prolapse in the bladder, and then the scoliosis of the spine. This was actually the first clue. This in the left eye, and then in the right eye I saw the wavy fibers. For me, that stood out, and so when we got to that area, I did ask her about it. So transversals, let me just read a little bit from Farida Sharon's book. Transversals are pretty much how they sound. They transverse or traverse the iris. They don't lay themselves out in the normal fashion that iris fibers do. And where they appear is significant. So let's see what Farida Sharon says. Transversals are reflexive fibers that cross over normal iris fibers. The ends of the transversals do not pass into normal radial iris fibers, but lie above the surface of normal iris fibers. Transversal fibers are hereditary or produced by extreme stress. Although they usually occur in the lower half or middle part of the iris, they may also be found more rarely in the head areas. So we are seeing this in the lower part of the iris. And she says some of the symptoms of transversals are organ displacement. How crazy is that? We have this prolapse in the bladder, and then we have organ displacement as one of the symptoms. Cysts, varicose veins, adhesions, pain, acute irritation, hernia, organ weakness and insufficiency, venous congestion, dizziness, insomnia, pain in the joints. Actually, I did want to mention that because she does have some pain in her joints, and connective tissue weakness. Okay, so that's that area. The bladder, the back, and now let's take a look at this area. So we have, again, the throat chakra, this very faint radii solaris here is in the vocal cords and trachea zone. Again, somewhat related to the medulla, certainly the throat chakra. I've been speaking a ton on this, the thyroid, Vata, the throat, this whole center, and I don't think I've mentioned in this video, the throat chakra is your creative expression and your ability to speak freely and to express your creative ideas. So it can manifest through artistic fashion, and it can manifest through, you know, bringing your visions into your reality. And most often it's associated with speaking your truth. So this is definitely coming up for this person. I'm not sure how it relates, but we're seeing a lot of emphasis on the throat chakra. She was a teacher, and is a teacher. Once a teacher, always a teacher, right? But yeah, speaking, expression, and then the element of air and space in the center as well. And there's much more to it, but I wanted to mention that because I don't think I did. And then this little marking right here, it can almost be a lacuna. In fact, these are like the closest things I've seen to, these would look more like little tiny crypts. And this could almost be a lacuna, but I feel like it's just a little split and then another little split, or inflamed fiber creating this marking, but this area is the thyroid. So again, thyroid and parathyroid. And again, the skin ring is a little bit more emphasized in this portion of the iris. And then above that, we have the jaw up in here, well, jaw up in here, and then but right here would be very, very close to the tonsils. I believe she said she still has her tonsils, but they, along with the anatomy of the throat, are emphasized here. All right, and then I'm gonna hop up to this area here. You see this little portion of the iris making itself into its own little territory. This here, this marking specifically right here is the eye. So everything we said about the eye when we were looking at the right eye, we're seeing just as much emphasis in the left eye, so all of that's going to apply. And, you know, with what we were speaking to regarding migraines, headaches, it's generally, most often, from what I know, a bilateral experience. I'm sure some people have it where it's just pounding on the right side and not on the left, but from my experience and from those I know, it's just it's pounding everywhere, all over. And then we have here the, guess what, temple and forehead zone. So again, this is coming up. So just as we spoke to in the right eye. And this whole area, I'm not seeing anything of super importance or significance. Again, there is some congestion in the pituitary gland area, but no radii solaris that I'm seeing. And so I'm going to leave these brain zones alone. We will note I am going to recommend something for the pituitary gland for her, as it is considered the master gland, and very much affects the health of the thyroid. What do I like for, I have to, I really like chaste tree berry for the pituitary gland. I know that if you look at the Dr. Morse supplements or herbal line, which sadly he has sold that line, and I actually encourage people to really find their own plants and make their own formulas, unless you're in alignment with that line. But I know that he used chaste tree berry in his formula, in his pituitary gland formula, and then the other one would be saw palmetto. I really like both of those, and so I will recommend those to her. So, all right, I think that might be it, and I'm gonna go ahead and complete this iris reading, and let me know if you have any questions. And again, thanks so much for watching. I appreciate all of your comments, and until next time, I'll see you soon. Bye.